Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Ecological succession is a very important component of ecosystem structure and function studies. So, this ecosystem succession module is having two parts, part 1 and part 2. In this module, we will study ecological succession part 1, and the learning objectives of this module are to learn about process of ecological succession and ecosystem development, to understand basic types of succession, to learn about different steps and processes ecological succession, to understand different models of ecological succession, and to know about structural and functional changes during succession. Ecological succession. All ecosystems change in structure and function with time. Some changes are seasonal, for example, rise or fall of a river and its effects on vegetation adjacent floodplains, seasonal growth and disappearance of plants in a forest, effects of stratification and mixing of water on plants in lakes and so on. Some other changes are long term, progressive and non-cyclical, which may result in a process called as ecological succession. Ecological succession is a fundamental concept in ecology and refers to orderly and predictable changes in the community structure and function with time. So, what is ecological succession? Ecological succession is defined as the orderly changes in community structure and function in an ecosystem with time, mediated through the modifications in physical environment, ultimately leading to a stable community over that area. Clements in 1916, while studying plant communities defined succession as the natural process by which the same locality become successively colonized by different groups or different communities of plants. As the process of succession proceeds, changes occur not only in the biotic community but also in physical environment, and overall characteristics of the ecosystem changes in a holistic manner. Therefore, Odom in 1969 preferred to designate the term as ecosystem development rather than ecological succession. Odom elaborated the process of ecological succession in terms of several parameters. Let me discuss them one by one. It is an orderly process of changes in species, structure and function with time within a community. It is a directional and continuous process and thus predictable. It culminates in a stable ecosystem with a dominant species known as climax, which is in more or less equilibrium with the surrounding environment. The entire sequence of communities that replace one another in a given area is called as seer, and the transitory communities are called as seral stages, such as grass stage, herb stage, shrub stage, etc. The initial stage is called pioneer stage and is characterized by early succession pioneer plant community. The last or terminal stage is known as climax. The pioneer community may be replaced more easily by the next seral stage, whereas climax community is considered as more mature and stabilized stage of ecosystem. What are the causes of ecological succession? Let me discuss them one by one. Initiating causes of ecological succession. These are climatic as well as biotic factors. The climatic factors include landslides, volcanic activity, wind, soil erosion, etc. And the biotic factors include various activities of organisms. The process of ecological succession is usually initiated by the formation of a bare area or habitat without any life form, for example by a landslide or lava flow, or formed from disturbances of an existing community, for example fires or land clearance. Second is excesses or continuing causes. These causes involve different processes like dispersal, migration, establishment, aggregation, competition, coaction, reaction, etc. These factors keep the pace of changes in community structure. Third is the stabilizing causes. According to Clements, climate is usually considered as one of the significant factors that causes stabilization of ecosystem. Let me discuss different types of successions. On the basis of nutrient availability in the soil, succession is of two types: primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession starts in a newly formed area where environmental conditions are elementary, such as a bare area formed by lava flow, a new pond created by a landslide, sand dunes formation, or bare rock surface formed by the retreating glaciers. The primary area contains no biological legacy, means there is no vegetation, seed bank or organic matter. For example, xeric succession beginning on a bare and dry land imply a directional development from first stage lichens toward a mature and stable ecosystem, usually a forest, and the same thing is shown here in this figure. Secondary succession. Usually secondary succession starts in an area previously occupied by a community but not devegetated by some natural or human activities like fire, storms, tree cutting, disease outbreak, cultivation, biotic interventions, etc. After several years, some new communities again occupy that area, and it is called as secondary succession, and same secondary succession is shown here in this figure. Autogenic and allogenic succession. After the succession has begun, sometimes the community itself modifies its own environment, which becomes unsuitable for that community, and its own replacement by new community takes place. This type of succession is known as autogenic succession. In some cases, the replacement of existing community take place due to some external forces, for example fire or human activities, and not by the existing community. This is called as allogenic succession. Autotrophic and heterotrophic succession. Autotrophic succession is characterized by the dominance of green plants and trees. In autotrophic succession, rate of production is more than the rate of respiration. Initially, primary producers are in majority, but later on biomass of organisms increases and ratio of production and respiration remains same. In heterotrophic succession, heterotrophs dominate, such as bacteria, actinomycetes, fungi and other consumers. Initially, the rate of respiration is greater than the rate of production. For example, small areas of rivers and streams which receives large amount of sewage or leaf litter. Hierarch and xeric succession. Depending on the nature of environment where the process begins, the succession is hierarch or hydroxere if it start in substratum where water is in plenty. For example, in ponds, lakes, streams, swamps, etc. It is xerarch or xerosphere if it begins in dry areas such as deserts, rocks, etc. Xerarch is sometimes classified in further groups: the lithosphere initiating in rocks, semosphere on sand, and halospheres in saline soil. The succession starting in an area with moderate moisture conditions is called as mesh arc. Several mechanisms or models have been given for ecological succession. Let me discuss them one by one. The first is Clements hypothesis. Clements, being the most influential ecologist to suggest the mechanism of succession, gave superorganism theory. According to this theory, the entire vegetation develops together as a single unit like a organism. He considered climax community to be a superorganism and succession the embryonic development of that organism. This figure shows the different processes recognized by Clements for ecological succession, and these processes are starts from nudation, then invasion, then competition and coaction, then reaction, and then stabilization. Let me discuss these processes one by one. Nudation. It is the formation of a bare area without any life form. It may occur due to topographic factors like soil erosion, landslide, volcanic activity, etc. Climatic factors like glacier, drought, frost, fire, etc. Or biotic factors like deforestation, cultivation, insect outbreak, agricultural practices, overgrazing, etc. Any of these factors may be responsible for nudation. Second process is invasion. In primary bare area, the seeds, spores or propagules of plants growing in adjacent area arrive through dispersal, and that dispersal may be by wind, water or animals. They are the pioneer stage of succession. Then successful establishment of the species as a result of their adaptation to new area take place. The seeds and spores germinate, grow into adult forms, increase in number and colonize. The third process in succession is competition and coaction. As the species number and size increase, it leads to competition for water, space and food. There can be interspecific or intraspecific competition. The species which don't succeed in competition will disappear, and the species which succeed will establish in that area. The species interact and affect each other's life in various ways called coactions. The fourth process is reaction. The action of colonizing species changes the surrounding abiotic environment like soil, water, temperature and availability of nutrients. These changes make the place unfit for existing species, and as a result they are replaced by a fit species. Fifth process is stabilization or climax. Eventually a stage is reached when the final plant community becomes more or less stabilized for a longer period of time and maintains equilibrium with the surrounding environment. It is more mature, stable, self-maintaining and self-reproducing through development stages. This final stable community of the seed is the climax community. This diagram show the process of succession with the pioneer, serial and climax communities under the influence of physical environment, taking the example of hydrosphere and geosphere. In case of hydrosphere, the pioneer stage is plankton stage, the next is submerged stage, then floating stage, then red swamp stage, then marsh meadow stage, finally woodland stage, and ultimately climax community, that is a forest. The second, in case of geosphere, crustose lichen stage is pioneer stage, then foliose lichen stage, then moss stage, then herbaceous stage, then shrub stage, and finally climax community, that is forest. So, this model containing 5 processes is called as Clements model. The another model is initial floristic model. Egler in 1954 proposed initial floristic concept by holding the view that most species are present right from the beginning of succession as seedlings or seeds, called as initial floristic pool, and succession merely represents changes in dominance over time. The species dominating at climax stage can be present from the initial stages of succession. They may grow slowly and dominate the side later, replacing the earlier fast growing species. Another model of ecological succession is Connell and Slater model. 3 different models of ecological succession were proposed by Connell and Slater in 1977. Let me discuss them one by one. First model is facilitation model. The facilitation model suggests that the disturbed area is first exploited by certain pioneer species that are most capable of invading and establishing on the site. These initial species modify the site, making it more suitable for invasion by other species. For example, by adding nutrients to the soil. Thus, the early species facilitate colonization by later species. Second model proposed by them was tolerance model. The tolerance model suggests that sequence of species in succession is solely a function of life history. The later species can invade and grow to maturity despite the presence of early species. With passage of time, the early species will be excluded. Third model proposed by them was inhibition model. The inhibition model suggests that as long as early species persist undamaged or continue to regenerate, they exclude or suppress subsequent colonies of all species. Modifications of the environment by the early species make it less suitable for both existing species as well as arrival of later species. Fourth model of ecological succession, individualistic concept. This individualistic concept was given by Gleason in 1926. According to this, the succession is an extraordinary mobile process whose processes are not fixed and don't occur in a definite predictable ways. Moreover, it occurs due to individual response of different species. All communities are unique and ever changing due to internal species variation occurring as a result of disturbances, competition or new arrivals. Therefore, succession is considered as a multi-directional process with different pathways and endpoints. Another model of ecological succession is 3-plant strategy model. Grime in 1979 recognized three categories of plants. Ruderals. Ruderals are the species that are fast growing, rapidly complete their life cycles and produce large amount of seeds. Second, competitors. These species are able to outcompete other plants by efficiently tapping into available resources. And stress tolerant species. Stress tolerant species are tolerant to shortage of resources. Grime expanded his theory to describe secondary succession. At the onset, ruderals are established in a disturbed site. Then after, in a favorable environment with potential for high productivity, competitive species play an important role and results in successive species changes. When conditions are stressful, say nutrient, poor soil or climate change, then competitive species play less important role and species changes are less. At this stage, stress tolerant species replace competitive species as stress increases. Another model of ecological succession is vital attribute model. According to Nobel and Slater 1980, vital attributes are those attributes of a species which are vital to its role in a vegetation replacement sequence. And these are the method of arrival or persistence of the species at the site during and after distribution, the ability to establish and grow to maturity in the developing community, the time taken for the species to reach critical life stages. More than one biological mechanism or phenomena may be responsible for a particular vital attribute displayed by a species, and for a given vital attribute, the biological mechanisms may differ from species to species. The vital attribute reflects only the outcome of these mechanisms. These three attributes in turn can be related to the duration of their dormancy. In the seed bank, there is at first fruiting and their longevity as adult. Another model is resource ratio hypothesis of competition. This model was proposed by Tillman in 1985. According to this model, interspecific competition for resources and patterns of long-term supply of limiting resources are the key factors for plant establishment and growth in an area. Limiting resources give rise to competition among species, and a resource ratio level is set. New species adapted to it succeeds. It suggests that if multiple species are competing for a single limiting resource, then species that can survive at the lowest equilibrium resource ratio level outcompete all other species. If two species are competing for the two resources, then coexistence is possible only if each species has a lower resource ratio level on one of the resources. Let me take an example. For example, two phytoplankton species may be able to coexist if one is more limited by nitrogen and the other is more limited by phosphorus. Now, to summarize this module, in this module we have learnt about the process of ecological succession and ecosystem development. We have also learnt and we have understood the basic types of succession. We have also learnt different steps and processes in the ecological succession, and we have studied different models of ecological succession in this module. Thank you.